good evening, and welcome. Tonight I'm going to be softly reading to you this book about Iran. Let's dive right in. Here's where you can see where Iran is in comparison to the rest of the world. Iran. Varied and beautiful land. Iran is cut off from the outside world by its beautiful but often desolate landscape. The east of the country is covered by a lifeless and salty desert. The western region is surrounded by mountain ranges that create a rugged barrier between Iran and its neighbors. The northern and southern frontiers are formed by shorelines. Iran's hugely varied landscape shapes the lives of its people. Lush coastal regions form the main farming centers. Most Iranians live in sprawling cities scattered across the central plateau. The plateau runs across the middle of Iran between the mountains, seas, and desert. The cityscape of Tehran, Iran's capital, mirrors that of any Western nation, but much of Iran is a truly wild environment, untouched by human development. At the heart of the region. Iran's location in Southwest Asia gives it a central role in a vast area that extends north to include the regions of Central Asia and Caucasia, east to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and west to the Arab states of the Middle East. A whole area is often known as the Greater Middle East. For millennia, Iran, formerly known as Persia, has been a meeting place for peoples and cultures from throughout the region. Iran's western border has traditionally marked the boundary between the Arab and non-Arab countries of West Asia. In the past, it shifted frequently as the two cultures clashed. Today, the conflict is echoed in a dispute over a large waterway the Iranians call Arfand Rud, which is better known as the Shatt al-Arab. Iran shares the Shatt al-Arab with its neighbor Iraq, but the two countries argue about the exact position of their borders. The Shatt al-Arab gives access to the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman beyond are Iran's shipping gateway to the Indian Ocean. Peaks above plateaus. Much of Iran's land is far above sea level. Mountains surround high and flat areas known as the Central Plateau. The Zagros Mountains tower over the western half of the country, sweeping from Azerbaijan province in the northwest to the Persian Gulf in the southeast. Many peaks in the range top 9,600 feet. The highest peak, Zardkuh, reaches 14,921 feet. High cliffs and steep canyons make the range impassable after heavy snowfalls during the winter. The Alborz Mountains are a narrower but even higher range than the northern border. They form a barrier between the Central Plateau and the Caspian Sea. The Alborz contains Iran's highest peak, the towering Kolaya Damavand. Empty lands. Two of the world's driest deserts cover the eastern Central Plateau. The Dasht-e-Lut, or Barren Desert, is one of the hottest places on Earth. During the brief wet season, water flows into the desert from the Zagros Mountains, but creeks soon dry up in the heat to leave salt flats, sand, and rocks. Between the Dasht-e-Lut and the Elburz Mountains in the north stretches the Dasht-e-Kavir, or Great Salt Desert. The Dasht-e-Kavir is dry for most of the year, but small streams create lakes and salt swamps in the winter and spring. One road crosses the heart of the two deserts, but otherwise the area is impassable. Low and lush. Iran has two lowland areas, the Caspian coast and the Khuzestan plain in the southwest. The Caspian coast is a long, narrow strip of land between the sea and the slopes of the Elburz Mountains. The region enjoys a subtropical climate. It rarely gets very cold and receives plenty of rain, making the soils very fertile. Farmers have cleared much of the natural forest to grow crops such as cotton, tea, and rice. Khuzestan is a lowland strip between the Shat al-Arab and the foothills of the Zagros Mountains that runs into Iraq. The Khuzestan plain contains most of Iran's deposits of petroleum and natural gas. Precious water. Oh, I mentioned these pictures in my history of Iran. This is the city of bomb before the earthquake and after the earthquake. So sad. Anyway, precious water. In a hot country with no large rivers, water is precious. Apart from the Shat al-Arab, the only Iranian river wide enough for cargo and passenger boats is the Karun. The Karun is fed by melted snow from the central Zagros Mountains and flows south across Khuzestan to the Shat al-Arab. Other smaller rivers drain into the Persian Gulf, while those that rise in the northern Zagros or Elborz drain into the Caspian Sea. On the central plateau, rivers run in spring when the winter snows melt, but are dry for the rest of the year. Many of the plateau's rivers do not reach the sea. They flow into lakes, which grow in spring but shrink during the summer as the heat evaporates the water. As the water evaporates, minerals in the lake become more concentrated. The water becomes too salty for drinking or watering crops. A mixture of peoples. Iran is home to around 70 million people. As a major power in the Middle East, Iran is often mistaken for an Arab country. However, most Iranians are Farsi, part of an ethnic group who also live in Central Asia and Western Afghanistan. Iran is home to people with other ethnic backgrounds too. For example, 24% of Iranians are Azerbaijanis. They live in the northwest. Another large group are the Kurds, who live close to the border with Turkey and northern Iraq. Some Arabs also live in Iran, mainly Khuzestan. Living landscape. Sorry for the sort of gruesome picture there. Not so long ago, Iran was home to many lions, tigers, and other big cats. Unfortunately, these sleek hunters are now very rare, and some have gone forever. Iran's last Asiatic lion was seen in 1941. There are only 350 wild Asiatic lions left, and they all live in India. The Caspian tiger used to hunt in the forests of northern Iran. Although people report seeing tigers in the area on occasion, biologists think that the Caspian tiger is now extinct. The two surviving Iranian big cats are the Asiatic cheetah and Persian leopard. Both are in danger of being wiped out as well. Around 60 cheetahs live in the national park within the Kafir Desert. Persian leopards are found among the Elborz and Zagros Mountains. Nevertheless, there are just a few hundred individuals. Wooded mountains. Iran is dominated by high plains and steep mountain ranges. The flat areas of the central plateau are dry and empty, while the mountain slopes receive enough water for forests to grow. Most of Iran's wildlife lives on the tree-covered slopes. The lower slopes of the Zagros Mountains are covered with patches of elm, maple, pistachio, and walnut trees. Willow and poplar grow in the ravines, as well as many creepers. Dense forests also abound on the slopes of the Elborz. Ash, cypress, elm, and oak trees are common there, together with some broad-leaved evergreens, ferns, and shrubs. Brown bears, wild goats and sheep, wolves and leopards thrive in the remote mountains. Amphibians, such as frogs and salamanders, live around the fast-flowing streams on the lower slopes. Cat snakes, rat snakes, and vipers hunt in undergrowth for lizards and small mammals. Scrublands. Heading down the slopes toward the central plateau, the woodlands thin out and give way to patches of almond trees and bushes such as the barberry and juniper. A low shrub called sagebrush is common in grassy areas, while acacias, dwarf palms, and wormwood grow on drier land. The grasses and shrubs are home to many small animals. Most are rodents such as hamsters and gerbils, as well as small hopping mice called jerboas. Larger animals in the area include deer, gazelles, rabbits, and hedgehogs. Hyenas, foxes, jackals, and sand boas are the plateau's hunters. Few species survive in Iran's deserts. Some isolated oases in the Kafir Desert support acacias, date palms, oleanders, plums, and tamarisk seeds. bird stop. Many birds spend the whole winter on Iran's northern and southern coasts or around the country's lakes and inland wetlands. Other species use the country as a stopover as they travel to and from wintering areas in Africa or South Asia. Water birds such as seagulls, ducks, geese, and terns thrive on the shores of the Caspian Sea and the Persian Gulf. The wetlands around Lake Urmia are breeding areas for the greater flamingo, the great white pelican, and other species. Many other bird species live in Iran all year round. Meat eaters such as the bearded vulture and golden eagle make their homes in the high mountains. A few species, including the giant houbara bustard and desert warbler, scratch out a living in the dry plains. Coastal visitors. Iran is bordered by two seas, but they are very different from each other. The Persian Gulf, an arm of the Indian Ocean, contains 200 species of fish. Dolphins, porpoises, and whales are also found there, although their numbers are falling due to frequent oil spills. The Caspian Sea is less salty than the ocean and is home to a different group of fish. They include large sturgeons, which were once common. Today, sturgeon are rare due to overfishing and poaching. The fish's salted eggs, called caviar, are in demand as a luxury food around the world. From ancient power to religious revolution. Iran is one of the oldest nations in the world. Its history dates back tens of thousands of years, although in the West it was called Persia rather than Iran until 1935. The land was the birthplace for some of the world's first civilizations. These slowly grew into the mighty Persian Empire, which ruled over the entire greater Middle East and became the world's first superpower. Iran has been at the center of many wars through its long history, and their effects can still be traced in the modern country. The invasion by Arab people in the 7th century has left its mark in particular by introducing the religion of Islam to Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born in 1979, when religious leaders toppled the monarchy. Empires rise and fall. Iran has been home to different cultures for millennia when the Achaemenids came to power in the 6th century BCE. Their ruler Cyrus I expanded territory under Persian control. He even defeated Mesopotamia, which had formerly been the major power in the region. After Cyrus's death, his son Cambyses conquered another great ancient civilization, Egypt. After Cambyses died, one of his generals, Darius, took control of Persia in 522 BCE. Darius transformed the Persian Empire into one of the most advanced civilizations on earth. When Darius died in 486 BCE, Persia had conquered all of its enemies but one, Greece. The two empires clashed several times before Alexander the Great, a Greek Macedonian general, conquered Persia in 330 BCE. The Greeks ruled Persia for the next 70 years before they were overthrown in an uprising led by the Parni, nomads in the grasslands north of modern Iran. The Parthian power. The Parni kings ruled for 5 centuries, but Parthia, as their kingdom is known, was seldom peaceful. Greek and then Roman forces tried to take over parts of the kingdom. In the 1st century CE, Parthia began to split into smaller states. Crippled by these divisions and its wars with Rome, the kingdom collapsed. Eventually, power fell into the hands of a Persian noble named Ardashir. Islamic conquest. Crowned in 224 as Shah, or King of Kings, Ardashir began 400 years of Sassanid rule. Zoroastrianism became the official religion, and arts and architecture blossomed. However, after centuries of fighting with Romans, Persia was weak. It was overrun by Arabs fighting in the name of a new religion, Islam. Persia became part of the Islamic Empire in 642. The empire was ruled by the Caliph, the spiritual head of Islam, from Baghdad in the west. Persian governors were left to manage their own affairs, however. Persian Persian culture absorbed Islamic influences but continued to be exciting and dynamic. In 1218, Persia was devastated by Mongols from East Asia. Persia was divided for the next 300 years until Shah Ismail I reunited it as the Safavid Empire in 1501. By the start of the 17th century, Shah Abbas the Great had transformed Persia into a major power once again. By now, most Persian people spoke Farsi and followed the Shiite branch of Islam. Outside influence. Safavid rule ended when Mahmud Khan from the east of the country invaded Isfahan, the capital, and began a century of upheaval and various rulers took control. Finally, in 1796, Aga Muhammad Khan came to power and established the Qajar dynasty. Once again, Persia's important location in the region attracted the unwelcome attention from other powers. Persia lost part of its northern territory to Russia when the British Empire took control of ports on the Persian Gulf. In return, Russia and Great Britain provided loans to Qajar rulers to help modernize Persia and strengthen its military forces. Western culture had increasing influence on Persian culture. The coming of change. Many Persians resented foreign control of their country. In 1906, they forced the Qajars to accept a new constitution and set up an elected parliament. Little changed, however. Britain and Russia dominated Persian affairs during World War I. After the Russian Revolution in 1917, Britain was left in control of Persia, even though it officially claimed to support Iranian independence. In 1921, Reza Khan, an army officer, seized power and adopted the name Pahlavi. He sought to reduce foreign influence and modernize the country. In 1935, he issued a royal decree that foreign diplomats should use the name Iran rather than Persia in their correspondence. The last Shah. When World War II broke out in 1939, Iran's ties with Germany alarmed the Soviet Union and Britain, which occupied Iran and forced the Shah from power. His son, Shah Mohammad Reza, took the throne. The new Shah fled in 1953, however, after clashing with Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. U.S. agents started an uprising that overthrew Mossadegh, and the Shah came back to the throne. He continued to modernize the country, making great improvements in public health. He was helped by the huge wealth created by the sale of oil. Despite the economic success, many Iranians saw the monarchy as corrupt and immoral. They gathered around Ruhollah Khomeini, an Ayatollah, religious leader, who became the Shah's main critic. In 1964, Khamenei was forced to leave the country. Opposition to the Shah continued, however. He was overthrown in 1979, and the Islamic Revolution became a success. Iran became an Islamic republic. Khamenei returned as supreme leader. Neighbors at war. Khomeini's rule was dominated by tension with the United States and war with Iraq. When the Shah fled to the United States, radical Iranians took 52 Americans hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. They held them for over a year. Iran's relations with the United States had been strong since World War II. Now the two countries stopped even talking to each other. In 1980, Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein invaded Iran to claim control of the Shah Al Arab and nearby oil fields. Iranian forces recovered and pushed the Iraqis back. The war lasted until 1988, when the United Nations negotiated a ceasefire. A year later, Khomeini died. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei became supreme leader. Liberal changes. In 1997, a new president, Mohammad Khatami, began reforms at home and proposed talks with other countries to resolve international tensions. At Iran's urging, the United Nations made 2001 the year of dialogue among civilizations. After the terrorist attacks in the United States of September 11th that year, however, U.S. President George W. Bush labeled Iran part of an axis of evil that threatened world peace. We're ending the history. It's supposed to be an old book. Anyway. Living in the Islamic Republic. Before the Islamic Revolution of 1979, Iran's culture had become widely influenced by the West. People watched Hollywood movies and listened to pop music. In the cities, many women wore Western clothes instead of the traditional black robe or chador. The revolutionary government rejected what it saw as immoral influences. Women covered up in public. Western pop music was banned. But in many ways, traditional values did not change. Showing hospitality to guests is still important. Iranian music and poetry are as popular as ever. Strong religious beliefs have been part of the Iranian character for thousands of years. So the interaction with other cultures, both welcoming their influence and rejecting it. So has interaction with other cultures. Putting religion first. Almost all Iranians are Muslims, and 90% of them follow the Shia branch of Islam. That makes Iran an unusual country. Most Islamic countries and Muslims worldwide follow the Sunni branch, as do about 6% of Iranians. From everyday life to the national government, Islam is central to Iranian society. Namaz is a prayer Muslims must perform 5 times a day, every day. Most people gather at mosques, but the prayer can also be said by individuals. Prayers dictate the routine of the entire day. They are said at dawn, midday, mid-afternoon, sunset, and at nightfall. Like other Muslims, Iranians fast during daylight hours in the month of Ramadan in the Islamic calendar. For this purpose, people wake before sunrise to have breakfast and then wait until sunset to eat their evening meal. The next largest religious group are Christians, followed by Zoroastrians, whose religion began in ancient Persia. Iranian cuisine. Muslims are forbidden to eat pork. Pigs are considered to be unclean animals, unfit for consumption. Muslims do eat some meat, mostly lamb, but the animal must be killed in a certain way, and a prayer must be said before the slaughter. A typical Iranian family meal consists of chicken, beef, or fish cooked with vegetables and fresh herbs, and served with rice and side dishes of cheese, cucumber, tomatoes, onions, and yogurt. Iranians eat flatbread, called nane lavash, with every meal. Other Iranian dishes include kuku, a pie filled with meat and vegetables, and ash, a thick soup. A stew called crushed efesnjan, made with chicken or duck, pomegranate juice, and ground walnuts, is an old Persian dish that is still popular today. Wedding days. Modern Iranian weddings combine Islamic and ancient Persian traditions. There are 2 stages to a marriage. The first stage is called Aqd, which is the most formal part of the ceremony. This takes place in a room decorated with flowers. A ceremonial rug called the Sofreye Aqd covers the floor. The rug is made of a luxurious fabric such as cashmere or silk. It faces east in the direction of the sunrise. Symbolic items such as spices, a mirror, and candles are placed on the Sofreye Aqd to bless the marriage. The bride dresses in white, the groom in black. The bride is asked 3 times if she consents to the marriage. She remains silent twice, but accepts to the 3rd time. The signing of the wedding contract marks the end of the ceremony. The couple then exchange rings and feed each other honey to sweeten their marriage. The second stage is a celebration called the Jashna Rusi. Most couples choose to have a big party with food and dancing. Traditionally, Iranian weddings are very expensive. The government pays for mass weddings to reduce the cost and encourage young Iranians to get married. An ancient art scene. Iranian arts and architecture owe much to the country's rich history. Iran boasts some of the world's greatest historical monuments, such as the remains of the Great Hall and the Royal Palace built by Darius at Persepolis. The Islamic conquest also left a lasting mark on Persian architecture, such as the Imam Mosque in Isfahan. The mosque combines both Islamic and Persian influences. Other Persian arts also flourished after the arrival of Islam, most notably literature. Iran's greatest poet was Ferdowsi, who wrote in the 10th century. He wrote in Farsi, even though Arabic was the language of Iran's rulers. Ferdowsi's masterpiece, Shahnameh, the Epic of Kings, is the national poem of Iran. It continues to influence contemporary Iranian literature. Iran has unique traditions of classical and folk music. Folk instruments such as the tanbur, a long-necked lute, are rarely played anywhere else. Ethnic groups such as the Azerbaijanis have also their own music and styles of dance, which are performed in colorful costumes. Today, Iranian pop artists such as Aryan and Oham are very popular. The arts since the revolution. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, artistic expression has been subject to state approval. Most newspapers and all television and radio networks are run by the government. Books and films are checked to ensure that they do not contain anti-government ideas. Many artists and writers have moved abroad, but others have still been able to create thoughtful works within Iran. Iranians have also found a new voice in the post-revolutionary era. Many Iranians have access to the outside world through the internet. Some have started blogs about their lives. Religious leaders in Iran have become wary of the internet, and bloggers are now required to register with the government. All sorts of sports. Iran has a lot of young people, and many of them play sports in their spare time. Women play non-contact sports such as volleyball and racket sports such as badminton. Strength sports and martial arts are popular among men. Wrestling is Iran's national sport, and Iranian athletes regularly achieve success in world championships and the Olympics. Weightlifting is another popular sport thanks to the Iranian Hercules, Hossein Rezazadeh, who holds world records in the sport's super heavyweight class. Iran's mountains offer a range of opportunities for sports such as climbing, hiking, and skiing. Games like chess and backgammon are popular in tea houses. By far the most popular spectator sport in Iran is soccer. The national team has won the Asian Cup 3 times and played in 3 World Cup final competitions. Iran has a successful professional soccer league, and several Iranians play for leading European teams. Religion and reform. Iran was transformed when Ayatollah Khamenei came to power. The new constitution introduced Islamic laws, or Sharia. Anyone who criticized the government was locked up or even executed. Khamenei promised to improve the lives of all Iranians, but the economy collapsed as skilled workers fled and Iran fought a long war with Iraq. That war is over now, and Iran's Islamic rule is no longer new. The laws have not changed, but they are not applied so strictly, and the economy is in better shape. Iran still faces one big problem, however. Since other countries believe that it is developing nuclear weapons, Iran insists that it has cooperated with United Nations inspectors checking its nuclear facilities, but the conflict has isolated the country again. What year was this book? 2004 or 5, not sure. Should have checked. Anyway, a new republic. The supreme leader of Iran wields ultimate political power. In 1979, Ayatollah Khamenei formed a system of government that would create laws that agreed with Islamic traditions. At that time, the politics of Iran was dominated by the Islamic Revolutionary Party, which favored a strictly controlled society. When the Islamic Revolutionary Party broke up in 1987 and Ayatollah Khamenei died 2 years later, various political groups began to appear. Most of them supported the ideas of the Islamic Revolution, but a few now call for greater social and political freedoms. Slow reform. By the late 1990s, the political situation began to change. In 1997, a reformer called Mohammad Khatami was elected as Iran's president. In the parliamentary elections of 2000, candidates who wanted reform were more popular than the conservatives. However, despite winning many seats in the parliament, the liberal politicians were opposed by the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei. As a result, the parliament could not do anything to make life better for the people who voted for it. The conservatives took back control of the government in 2004. Any hopes of reform suffered in 2005 when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, a close supporter of the supreme leader, became the new president. Just after months on the job, Ahmadinejad sparked an international outcry with his outspoken attacks on Israel. black gold. Iran's economy was in ruins when the bloody war with Iraq ended in 1988. During the war, Iraq had bombed cities and villages, and Iran's roads and water supplies were destroyed. The total damage was estimated at $1 trillion. The task of rebuilding Iran was further hampered by trade restrictions imposed by the United States. However, Iran has one thing on its side: vast oil wealth. Iran has the third largest reserves of crude oil in the world and the second largest reserves of natural gas. That means the country can still attract billions of dollars of foreign investment, despite the U.S. trade restrictions. So much money comes from places such as Brazil, China, Japan, and many European countries that oil and natural gas generate more than half of Iran's wealth. Building the economy. Iran's reserves of oil and natural gas will not last forever. As a result, the Iranian government is investing in other industries to help build the economy. It has built dams to set up irrigation projects to help farmers grow valuable foods, such as dates, pistachios, and saffron, which can be sold abroad. Iran also produces a wide range of manufactured goods such as cars, electronics, textiles, and chemicals and drugs made from oil. Iran is also the best place to buy a carpet or kilim, a traditional hand-woven Persian rug. Visit the past. Tourism is another growing industry in modern Iran. Few foreigners dared to visit Iran in the years of war after the 1979 revolution, but the country's rich history and natural beauty are once more starting to attract visitors. The government is encouraging tourists. It has made it much easier to get a visa that allows travelers to visit Iran and has invested in roads, railroads, and airports. Most tourists are Muslim from ancient countries that make pilgrimages to the religious shrines in Mashhad and Qom. Iran is also becoming a more popular destination among Western tourists who visit historical sites such as Persepolis. Iran's tense relations with the West, however, make the future of such tourism uncertain, along with the future of the country. Many other nations are nervous about Iran's aims. As in the past, Iran may become somewhat isolated from much of the rest of the world. As history shows, however, Iran's key location in the greater Middle East guarantees that it will not be long before it is once again at the very heart of international affairs. I was going to say, that sounds like a conclusion. There we go. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it relaxing and educational. And I hope you have a very good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night. Good night.